So many Americans are suffering loss of a loved one, suffering economic hardship. The country is crying out for leadership. Leadership that can unite us, leadership that brings us together. That's what the presidency is. The duty to care for all of us, not just those who vote for us, but all of us. But I promise you this, I won't traffic in fear and division. I won't fan the flames of hate. I'll seek to heal the racial wounds that have long plagued our country, not use them for political gain. I'll do my job and I will take responsibility. I won't blame others. You know, I've said from the outset of this election that we're in the battle for the soul of this nation. What we believe, and maybe most importantly, who we want to be. It's all at stake. When we stand together, finally as one America, we'll rise stronger than we were before. I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
The Forum, exclusively on Facebook Live, Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. until 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. Call in or text live 414-395-0484. Thought-provoking talk radio covering all topics from local to national and everything in between. It may not be what you expect to hear, but we will definitely give you what you need to know. That's The Forum, exclusively on Facebook Live, Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. until 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. Podcasts available on our website, theforum2.com. Check us out. Good morning, welcome to the program. Today is Tuesday, July 28th, 2020. So early voting starts today in the city of Milwaukee, and I specify the city of Milwaukee because different municipalities may have different hours of operation. So just so you know, because what I'm coming to find out is that people are so focused on the November 3rd election, which is very good. Please be focused on that. But there is a primary election on Tuesday, August 11th. And if you live in certain areas of the city of Milwaukee, there are a number of Democrats running either in open seats or in seats where there is an incumbent and here's why I think primary elections are good. Let me kill this music here. Let's kill that. The country is shifting right now, as I don't have to tell you that. And so what primary elections do is they put people of the same party against each other so we can, as the voters, decide what kind of Democrats we want in office right now, or what kind of Republican you want in office right now. So what primary elections do is they pit individuals of the same party against one another. And I think this is one of the purest forms of democracy. So it's not about Democrat versus Republican. We get to that in November. This is about what kind of Democrat and what kind of Republican do you want to hold public office. As the times are changing and we have to make an awful lot of adjustments to business and to social life and family life and education, what kinds of people, what kind of leadership qualities are you looking for in a leader for this very new, unusual, unorthodox, and quite honestly, a scary world? At the same time, we are bombarded with the issue of race. And I say bombarded with it because now there are so many different angles to it. I'm going to be honest with you guys, and maybe I'm the only person that feels this way. I get a little uncomfortable when I hear Black Lives Matter being chanted by a bunch of white people. I know that I'm supposed to be encouraged by it and flattered by it. And on previous programs, I've said like, wow, this is great. White people are chanting Black Lives Matter. But do some of you get the feeling that it's a little bit insincere? I don't know. I'm trying to get over that. Like, it just doesn't seem real to me. As I'm watching what is unfolding in Seattle and Portland, more so Portland, where more federal troops are on their way. These are white people. Portland is 80% white. And like 5% black or something. Like it's really small African American population in Portland. But the people that are in the streets that are chanting, they're still chanting George Floyd's name, which is more than I can say about some black folks. I'm trying to wrap my head around it because I can't get used to it, and I can't apply any logic to it when white people are chanting Black Lives Matter. Like, I'm more introspective than that. Like, when I hear it, I'm thinking, well, what do you really mean? Like, what part of my life matters? Does my life matter enough to where you would want to exchange places with me? Are there any white people that would exchange places gladly and willingly with African Americans? And I'm not talking about the Rachel Dolezal types that just all of a sudden decided that they wanted to identify as being black. I mean, if you legitimately could be an African American person who's descended from slaves, would any white person willingly take that challenge and like, oh, I'm going to live my life as an African American? Because I don't know if anybody would want to do that. In order for me to better communicate to some of our well-meaning white friends, Sherwin, what can I do? How can I be better? How can I? So you're putting a lot of pressure on African Americans. Like we have to tell you how you're supposed to be better when it comes to race. That's a very tough proposition because if we give you a set of instructions of things you can do and how you can get involved, it'll fall on deaf ears most of the time. But in order for me to better understand, at least how I can communicate, I'm becoming much more patient now when people who reach out and say that they are genuinely concerned and they want to do something different. They want to be better. They realize that they were duped as well. They were lied to as well. They were told very specific things about their history. They were told very negative things about other races, other cultures, and other religions. And once they realize that, they're reborn almost. And they want to be different. Fabulous. But it's really, really difficult for me to communicate effectively to those people because what they'll do is they'll keep an inventory to try and prove that they're worthy of being an ally. They'll tell you about the groups and affiliations, and they went marching on a Wednesday one evening, and it was the most moving experience of their life, and they're trying to justify that they're an okay white person. I really hate that because that means you have a level of insecurity about yourself. That if you have to tell a black person your anti-racism resume, well, look at the things that I've done. You're embarrassing yourself when you do that. But in order for me to better understand this whole thing of privilege, because even when you bring the privilege word up, depending upon who you're talking to, it evokes a lot of emotion because some people who are not privileged at all. I mean, there's white folks that can't even help themselves. And so when you call them privileged, they take great offense to that. And so you have to have a much deeper conversation about what we mean with the term privilege. And because it's a multifaceted definition, it also depends on who you're having the conversation with. Because there are some people that thoroughly understand what privilege is. As a man, I have male privilege. I have a lot of it. In fact, because the title of this live is, would you trade places with an African American? At least I think that's what I said. Something like that. Would you trade places with an African American? It's kind of a rhetorical question, but by all means, if any white people want to answer that, and no, you can't trade places with Oprah or Barack Obama or Michelle Obama or Beyonce or Jay-Z. You can't be one of those kind of black people. I mean like a poor or working class or unemployed African American with a felony record. Would you trade places with that person? Probably not. And then at the same time, as I'm trying to understand privilege so I can better communicate about the subject to people that may have a different or differing definitions of it, one way I can do that is to understand my privilege as a man, because I'm going to tell you right now, even if I could identify as a woman, there is no way I would want to be a woman in today's world or any other time in history. There's no way. There's no way. Women have it rough. They really do. whether they admit it or not, and I guess it may vary because if you're a woman and you're really wealthy, it helps. But at the same time, there's still things that women deal with that men never even have to think about. So with that being said, I never would want to identify as a woman. I wouldn't want to be one. And this is not a slight against women. It's just saying that y'all have it tough. And so, and trying to explore that, right? Because if I look at how I'm privileged and some advantages that I have, even though there are disadvantages, like every black person's life is not pure disadvantage. Like every time we leave the house, we're not getting murdered by the police. Statistically, we just don't do as well, or we're not on par, we're not competitive, or we don't have as much wealth. But this is when you take into account tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of African Americans over time, and you do a comparative study. Statistically, we don't do as well. But individual black people may, in small pockets, do very, very well for themselves. Men, on average, across race and culture, have certain things that we never have to fear and we never have to worry about. And so there's privilege in that. To not be psychologically consumed with your safety. If you're a man walking down a dark alley one night looking for your car, you're probably more annoyed that you're walking and looking for your car. Where a woman in that same situation, I wouldn't want to be her. Why? Because statistically, men kill women. I mean, women do some killing of each other a little bit, but the number one killer of women is men, like across the board, across cultures, across countries. So I wouldn't want to be a woman for that reason. But then as I'm further exploring this, and I might be getting a little too granular or cerebral today, but it's my broadcast, so I'm going to ask you guys a question. I'm going to go right to the comment box to try and get an answer for this question. Are there any parts of the male anatomy, like anywhere in our body, and there's only a few places where the anatomy of Homo sapien male and female species differ? Okay, so there's definitely some different plumbing and other things, different hormones. It's a thing called body morphism, where men are typically bigger and have different builds than women. Sexual morphism, I think they call them. Sexual bimorphism, something like that. So there's some physical differences between the species. But are there any parts of a man's body named after women? It's kind of a ridiculous question, right? Like, why is Sherwin asking that? What's in that coffee you're drinking, Sherwin? No, I'm being serious. Are there any parts of a man's anatomy or any medical procedures that are specific to men that are named after women? Because you guys may know something that I don't. But then when I ask the question in the inverse, how many parts of female anatomy are literally named after men, or procedures that women go through that are named after men, it actually is staggering. I can thoroughly understand how some women may feel insecure about their bodies because some of the procedures that women have to go through as a part of being a woman, or even parts of their bodies and their reproductive system, are named after men. When I found this out, I was just floored. We have so marginalized women that we take their body parts and name them after the men that discovered them. So I'm going to get into that because it's just mind-blowing. You guys know who James Sensenbrenner is? He was a congressman. Well, he still is. He's not running for re-election. Jim Sensenbrenner got elected in like 1978 and has served until, so his last term is now. And then there is a general election November 3rd against Scott Fitzgerald, who is the Senate majority leader in the Wisconsin State Legislature. And then Tom Palzowitz. Tom is actually a friend of mine. He's running in the 5th Congressional District as the Democrat. James Sensenbrenner, congressman, very conservative congressman, even said some very disgusting and disparaging things about Michelle Obama, making comments about her body. That's another thing. Men make a lot of comments about women's bodies and we demean them based upon their physical shape. Now, men have body issues, body image issues as well, but not to the extent that women do. So let me not compare. But a lot of people may not know that Congressman Jim Sensenbrenner is an heir to the Kimberly Clark fortune. Kimberly Clark is a Fox Valley company. They're located in Appleton. The Fox Valley is an area in northeastern Wisconsin. It's Green Bay, Neenah, Menasha, Oshkosh, Appleton, Fond du Lac, and there's probably some others that I'm missing. Oshkosh. Congressman Jim Sensenbrenner, who's probably been one of the most anti-abortion, anti-woman members of Congress in several generations. His great-grandfather invented Kotex, the sanitary product for women. Like, nobody knows that. Like, he's an heir to the fortune of the company that invented Kotex, and it was actually his great-grandfather. Like, some of that is just the privilege of being a man, because I'm sure women have had inventions and ideas on better to take care of themselves, so to speak, but have never been able to bring such inventions or products to market. And so men get the credit for this. But then when I got to go through this list, guys. Good morning, everybody. Let me say my good mornings before I get deep. Vanessa Garrett, good morning. Susie Roundy Schmidt, good morning. Nicole Renee, good morning. Cassandra D, good morning. Udell Harris, good morning, my brother. And he has an emoji of a very disturbed looking cup of coffee. Gordon Prater, good morning. Carmen Patterson, good morning to you. Aaron Crockett says, white people have an ability to straddle the race line, can go to a couple of Black Lives Matter rallies, but then vote for a candidate who will literally kill me the next day, and I'll be none the wiser. You know, black people can... I used to not care at all if black people were Republicans, because I used to have an under-evolved political philosophy that says, oh, as black people, we need black people in the room, at every table, at the Democratic table, the Republican table, the church table, the dinner table, the business table, the round table, the boardroom table. I wanted black people to be present everywhere in American society, because then we can take the skills and the knowledge learned from being at these different tables back to the community to further help and assist members of our own community. Now, and you know, there's some black people have decided that now is the time in which they want to be a Republican and want to run for office as a Republican. You're joining the Confederacy. That's what you're doing. Call it whatever you want. You can say it's because you're, anti-abortion or something about business, or you want smaller government. I mean, you can say all of that, because here's the thing. Do you understand that you can be all of those things and still support Democratic candidates? The Republicans don't have a monopoly on any good idea. And so this is just me talking. And of course, there's going to be some difference of opinion and some variation, but I don't think you need to be a Republican because you have certain beliefs. What the Democratic Party has, the Republican Party will never have, and it's getting worse for them as time goes on, is a diversity. The diversity of people that will affiliate themselves with a party. Let me be clear about this. A party, not a person. Joe Biden as a man is one thing. Joe Biden, who will support Democratic policies and proposals, is another. He is just a vehicle. Stop voting for the man and thinking you have to like the man and like the things he said and like the thing he's done. It has nothing to do with that. Joe Biden, like the entire apparatus of political parties, are just a single tool in a shed that helps achieve justice and equality. That can't come down to one man. That's us believing in white supremacy. Because here's the thing. Barack Obama was never the Democratic Party, was he? He was a guy who got nominated by the Democratic Party and ran as a Democrat. But now it seems like Joe Biden is the Democratic Party. No, he's not. He's just a dude. And he's run as a Democrat before. He's run for president before. He's run for the U.S. Senate before as a Democrat. Okay. But that's just, we have to look at politics as armor to protect ourselves from injustice, to try and achieve some economic fairness, opportunities for healthcare, good jobs, good schools. It's not the be-all, end-all. Joe Biden is not the be-all, end-all. In fact, if you just want to make it a referendum on him and his personality, so the political party itself has got a platform, and a lot of times that platform has action items in it or policies in it that address the needs of communities of color, poor people, working class people, immigrants, the LGBTQIA community, etc. So, that being said, you can still be all sorts of conservative and be a Democrat. So joining the Republican Party right now is literally like, well, I want to be a part of the Confederacy. Let me see if I can maintain and own slaves. Like that's because what we're seeing is the South rising again, essentially. Marlon Pitchford says, what up, people? Sahara Ali says, buen dia tú también. Eileen Seeger says, hello, Ronald Waters. Hello, Antonio Glenn says, good morning. And so as I'm trying to understand this whole thing of privilege and trying to tell white people that they have privilege and they get really mad at that. And so eventually we're just going to stop saying it because it's offensive. I don't have any privilege, and they'll tell you how hard they work. And then when it really gets good, when you have the conversation about with a well-meaning white person, when you talk to them about privilege, just as a matter of conversation, like not accusing them of doing something wrong, but just, in America, certain things aren't fair. And they'll tell you about somebody came over, like their grandparents maybe, or maybe we're another generation removed. Their great-grandparents came from Ireland, or, the Italians. Oh, nobody was oppressed more than the Italians. Sure, when my great-grandmother came over here from Italy, nobody liked her because she was Italian, so I know what you blacks go through. Of course you do. And so whenever you're trying to have a conversation about privilege, then there's always going to be the one that says, the Irish were slaves too, we had it just as bad, the Irish did. No, you didn't. But that's oftentimes what you get. So to better explore this whole idea of privilege, I looked at my male privilege and I was very honest with myself and said I would never want to trade places with a woman. Not even a successful woman. Because there's so many inequities when it comes to gender that even a successful woman still has the same fears as a woman who's not successful. Like there's a commonality there. Now, the wealthier woman can be a bit more inoculated, but not immune. So there's a doctor named George Papanikolaou. Sounds Greek. George Papanikolaou. The pap smear is his namesake. A Greek doctor, the procedure that women get to, sort things out, is named after a man. Are you guys familiar with the G-spot? Some of you men absolutely are not familiar with the G-spot, but it is a collection of nerve endings just inside the vaginal canal. It's just up a little bit. The G-spot is named for Ernest Grafenberg. A part of a woman's anatomy is named after a man, and it's called the G-spot because apparently his last name is too much to say. It's the Grafenberg spot. Am I the only one that's blown away by this? There are parts of a woman's anatomy that are actually named after men. Gabriele Falloppio, an Italian. Yep, the fallopian tubes are named after him. Then there's another one. This one's a little bit more controversial, but I don't think it should be. It also goes to show that we, just as human beings, are still very perplexed with all the medical technology we have and all the science that we have. When it comes to a woman's anatomy, we don't know a lot. We really don't. We think that we do, but we don't. The fact that there are parts of women's bodies that named after men, and I don't want to laugh, but Doesn't it make sense why women could very well feel insecure about their bodies? Because they may be referring to a particular part of their anatomy, and every time they do so, they're referring to a man's name, like men discovered stuff in women and had the arrogance to name these parts of anatomy after themselves. That's privilege. To discover something that was already there and then name it after yourself. So Christopher Columbus did not exactly discover America. It already existed, but all of a sudden we give him the credit. But I think as time goes on, we give him less and less credit because Christopher Columbus statues that exist in this country have been coming down like Confederate monuments. But then there's Alexander Skene, Skene. There is a paraurethral gland between the clitoris and the urethra, or between the clitoris and the vaginal opening, and it's a paraurethral gland, which is responsible for female ejaculation, which some of you don't think exists because we have been made to feel and be ignorant about the capabilities of a woman's body. When you talk about things like that, it's a very masculine sounding thing, and women that have that kind of free sexual expression and free liberation may be ashamed of the wonderful things that their bodies can do. But the Skene's gland is also named after a man. And so I asked the question earlier, are there any parts of a man's body that are named after women? And if there were, it could be a legitimate source of insecurity for men, because if they're referring to parts of their anatomy, they're saying a woman's name. But I think all of you know that would never happen. And so in trying to think of different ways in which I can have conversations about privilege, I can say unequivocally, there are no parts of my body that are named after a woman, because as a man, I get to choose what parts of a woman's body I want to name after myself. That is privilege to the highest degree. And me as an individual man, like I didn't do that. Like I didn't name women's anatomy after myself. But I think as men, we need to step back and take a look at how we have just colonized women's body. So when people go to medical school, right, and they learn about the fallopian tubes, they're actually saying a man's name. It's a man discovered, here's the thing, a man that came, an egg that traveled down the fallopian tube of his mother the fallopian tube has now been named after him. Hi, Tammy Reed. She says, I'm late, but good morning. Politics on Monday. Tuesday, G-Spot namesake. Love this show. We got to keep it varied. I mean, I could talk about a whole bunch of political stuff. I mean, I want you guys to vote. Early voting is going on right now through Sunday, August 9th. I posted in the forum Facebook group where you can drop off the ballot that you have received via mail if you requested one, or you can still mail it in. You can still do that. Or you can vote at one of the early voting sites, and there's quite a few of them, or you can vote in person on August 11th. The early voting sites that I have listed in the forum Facebook group, it's only one person at a time. But because today is the first day of early voting, you probably could go to one of those early voting sites throughout the city of Milwaukee and not have a very long wait. So those of you that want to vote that way, by all means, I'm encouraging you to do so. So let me get back on track. So I do got to get into the politics stuff. I also wonder if come January of next year, let's say January 21st, because Inauguration Day is January 20th. And so when we wake up on January 21st, it's going to be an emotional day either way. I can't really project to what that day is going to be like, but either way, there's going to be tens of millions of people in this nation that are unhappy. And maybe hundreds of millions of people, if not a billion people around the world that may be unhappy with what America has done to ourselves and then also what we've done to the rest of the world. So on January 21st, it'll be a new world. And my question, the political question is, and don't worry, I can get back to women's anatomy. Do you want Democrats that will work with Republicans? Or have we written off the idea of bipartisanship because of what Republicans have said and what they have done and how far they were willing to go to support Donald Trump. Not all Republicans feel that way. And so I ask this to people because most of my professional and personal circle and my familial circle is Democrats, multiple generations of Democrats. Do you want your Democratic representatives in Congress, in the Senate, in the state legislature, and even on the city council or the county board? Do you want them to have open minds and working with Republicans? I'm talking about common sense stuff. I'm talking about putting money in people's pockets and rebuilding the economy and helping out families. If there are Republicans that agree with some of those platform items, are you okay with your democratically elected Democratic representative working with those Republicans? Because I'll tell you what, up until this point, if you're a Democrat and you worked with Republicans to get legislation passed, because Republicans have just had majorities all throughout legislative government up until the midterm election of 2018 for a very long time. And so if you were a Democrat in the minority, you had no choice. Your bill wouldn't even get heard at committee unless you worked with or collaborated with Republicans. And a lot of Democrats who wanted to do things for their district, they wanted to do things for the people that elected them, they wanted to do this ridiculous thing called keep their campaign promises, were forced to work with Republicans. And sometimes Republicans listened. But those Democrats were punished. They were punished by their caucus. They were punished by their campaign committees because they wanted to make good on their campaign promises and actually get a piece of legislation signed into law. And I don't know the answers to the question. I don't know if Democratic constituencies and Democratic voters want their Democratic elected officials to work with Republicans. If Congresswoman Gwen Moore can find a Republican somewhere in the House of Representatives, I don't know where she's going to find one, that sees the issues in Milwaukee as an example of needing attention from the federal legislature, would you be okay with Congresswoman Gwen Moore getting all up on TV and with a podium and she's wearing her glasses? Would you be okay with her standing next to another House Republican saying that there is the Moore-Smith bill? It'd be half Gwen Moore's name, half the Republican's name, and they're talking about how they're going to work together. Would you lose confidence in Congresswoman Gwen Moore if she did that? Or do we have the ability, or have we lost the ability, to look past partisanship and look at policy? Because I need to know. Asking for a friend. Can we get past? And here's the thing, because I will always surrender to the democracy. I can do my part. I can engage people in conversation, and we can have, a chat about policy. And that's all I can do, right? I can try and help candidates raise money. I can go campaign for them. But at the end of the day, if my candidate or the party I'm aligned with loses, then I have to work within the system that exists. I may not want to, but I also know that it's very temporary. So whenever Democrats get the full majority, it's temporary. Whenever Republicans get the full majority, again, it's temporary. And so if the democracy decides to go in that direction, it means I can't overstate my position as a Democrat when the Republicans control everything. It's like you got to work with them temporarily until Democrats can beat the Republicans at the ballot box, which we have a very, very hard time doing. Are we okay with Democratic representatives seeking out Republicans to work with if Republicans still maintain majorities, especially in the Wisconsin State Assembly, where the Democrats are, probably another census away from getting the majority back in the Wisconsin State Assembly? So are you telling me for the next 10 years you don't want your democratically elected Democratic State Assembly members to work with any Republicans for the next 10 years? Aaron Crockett said, the good old days when our reps went across the aisle to get stuff done. Yes, I am down with the common sense problem solving. So what I've learned and what I've noticed is that there are a number of Democrats that can get away with it. They can get away with working across the aisle. And they can get a lot of stuff done. In fact, if you're a Democrat that has the ability, or if you have relationships formed with Republicans and you can get bills signed into law, your Democratic colleagues that don't have that same ability hate you. But here's what saves those Democratic representatives that are known for working across the aisle. And I say working across the aisle because if they want to actually get things accomplished for their constituents, the people that put them there, they have to. You can't just stomp your feet in the Democratic caucus when the Democrats don't even chair any committees. It is the privilege that exists, especially in Milwaukee, along our more affluent lakeshore communities, where those people, yeah, I'm going to call them those people, they have opportunity, they have wealth, they've got businesses, they've got investments, they've got life insurance, they've got condos that overlook the river on one side, the lake on another. They don't care if their Democratic representatives don't get any bills signed into law because, quite honestly, those people on the fashionable east side, they don't need anything. They don't need policy changes. They don't need income inequality to be a policy proposal because they don't experience income inequality. They are the income inequality. And so here's what happens. They will vote for a particular type of Democrat. They don't just jump up and down and make a whole bunch of noise, but won't get one single bill signed into law because when you represent affluent, limousine liberals, they don't put pressure on their elected officials to do anything. As a matter of fact, they quietly like Trump. Something. Well, the tax cuts and Trump, he says terrible things, but our income and our investments, blip, 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 blip. As opposed to African Americans who send Democrats to the Wisconsin state legislature with a requirement that you adhere to your campaign promises and you begin to address the inequalities and the disparities that exist in our community. And we widely understand that, and the black folks that we send to the Wisconsin state legislature, they understand that too. But within the Democratic caucus, if you have Democrats that can get elected and reelected without doing anything, without helping black people, without helping move the needle forward policy-wise, you have this kind of infighting. So what we're doing is we are forcing black elected officials, the clock is ticking. They have to get things done because if another day goes past and black elected officials, especially in the Wisconsin state legislature, are not passing meaningful legislation, black children are losing their futures, losing their opportunities, and quite honestly, losing their lives. Every day. It doesn't stop. And because there are so many Democrats that represent areas that just don't need anything, they get mad at the Democrats that actually have to stick to campaign promises because that forces those Democrats to, number one, do the right thing. Number two, work with Republicans. But then you make some of the more liberal and progressive Democrats, you make them look bad because these black elected officials who were sent to the legislature with real specific instructions. You need to help black communities. You need to look at policy from the angle of the community that is suffering. You need to be our voice in Madison. And Madison is a very scary white place. Oh, the racism in Madison will blow your mind. Maybe it won't. Even white Democrats that represent parts of Madison, just black people are an afterthought. Even it's amazing how the duplicity of it, and black people are really the only people that can explain it with any kind of credibility. It's like you'll think that Milwaukee is poorly run and black people have a cultural problem and they don't know how to raise their kids and they've got all these other issues, but you need those same black people that you just demeaned to vote for your Democratic presidential candidate or your U.S. Senate candidate or your state Supreme Court candidate. Funny how that works. So you need to be really, really careful in how you craft your language about black communities and black cultures because we're watching. Because all it takes for Donald Trump to get reelected is a few black folks to say, I don't like how the Democrats operate. I don't like how they don't get behind policy proposals for us, but need us and bombard us with text messages and junk mail telling us to vote, begging us to vote. But when we say, hey, we have some policy ideas that we think can not just help black people, but can help everybody, indigenous people, our Latinx brothers and sisters, poor working class white people, if the policy comes from black people, it falls on deaf ears. We are only necessary for votes. And that's how we feel. Maybe that's not the case, but that's certainly how we feel in Wisconsin because the disparities that exist in Wisconsin when it comes to black people are so well known. Not only can people recite them blindly here, people around the country know how screwed up we are here when it comes to the economic engine of the state, which is Milwaukee, which is majority black and brown. remember, as privileged as you may be and as superior as you may think you are because your history leads you to those falsities, if those same black people do not come out and vote in astronomical numbers for Democratic candidates across the board, the U.S. Senate, House of Representatives, and for the president, Donald Trump is going to niggerize you worse than we as black people have been niggerized throughout history. You tell white people that they can't leave the house or they have to wear a mask, worse than you can say to some of them. What do you mean I can't do this? I own everything in this country. This country is mine. This country was founded by people that look like me. Even God looks like me. What do you mean that I have to do these things? You're encroaching on my freedom. And to them, that feels like oppression. It's amazing how ironic this is. The same people that suffer the most have to be the saviors of this democracy. And then when it happens, let's say Joe Biden wins, and let's say there's a Democratic sweep in the U.S. Senate, and we can start getting, common sense policies passed and signed into law. We're going to have a federal government that actually helps the people and protects the United States instead of sending troops against American citizens. You know what they're going to say? They're going to say, wow, the demographic of suburban white women really came out strong for Biden. And when we hear that, we just laugh because we know it was us. Just like the suburban white women that voted for Donald Trump because they hated Hillary Clinton will get the credit for Joe Biden's victory. Now, that won't be every news media outlet, but when you hear that, and you will if Joe Biden wins, they're still going to discount us. It's us. And you know it's us. Hey, black people in the room or people that will be watching this broadcast, how many text messages have you received or how many pieces of spam mail have you gotten in your mailbox asking you to vote, telling you to vote, requesting your absentee ballot? Some of you are just receiving your ballots without even asking for them. And I would ask my African-American friends and colleagues and family members, how many of those correspondences have you received? Compared to the white suburban women who are partially responsible for Donald Trump. Don't run from it now. Don't run from it now because Donald Trump is now making you send your kids back to school and you're all going to get the coronavirus. White women could have had a white woman president. And let me not marginalize that because somebody could say, oh, sure, when you could have had a black elected official or a black person, whatever. It has to be the right black person. And maybe Hillary Clinton, to some, to enough, white women was not the right white woman. Say that 10 times fast. But I don't even know if it should have been a referendum on Hillary Clinton as like a personality. But her views on policy, if I could do something to get people to see past the flaws of the person and look at the productivity of their political stances and their positions, because at this point it's not about Joe Biden. I just need Joe Biden to just kind of sit there and point. And when I say sit there and point, I mean appoint people to positions in the federal government that will uphold the good parts of the federal law that were designed to help people. I don't need Joe Biden to do a lot. I need him to delegate authority to other department heads, other cabinet level secretaries that will begin to mend the fences that have been broken by a Trump administration that was a bull in the china shop of not just the federal government, but the entire U.S. Constitution. I don't need Joe Biden to do a lot. I need him to sign stuff. Hey, Joe, the democratically controlled U.S. Senate just passed another coronavirus relief bill where people are going to get health insurance and $2,000 a month for the next 2.5 years. Joe, don't say anything. Don't get in front of a teleprompter. Just sign it. I just need Joe to be, oh, where's the pen? That's all I need him to do. I don't need him to even say anything. Hey, Joe, Nancy Pelosi is working on an infrastructure bill, because remember infrastructure? And we're actually going to get some things done when it comes to infrastructure. And then the Senate is also going to pass it. Joe, will you sign it? I just need him to go like this. That's all. I don't even. So his personality, okay, he is who he is. I just need his pen, and I need to make sure it's got ink in it. Assuming the Democrats can wrestle away a majority from the U.S. Senate, because Ruth Bader Ginsburg is going to die. I need to give you that one more time. Because y'all acting like she's not going to die. She's dying right now. They have not released such information, but I promise you, an 87-year-old woman who is battling pancreatic cancer for the second time in like 2 years. You know John Lewis just died from pancreatic cancer, right? Ruth Bader Ginsburg is dying. There are methods of cancer treatment that I'd imagine her immune system probably cannot handle. If Donald Trump gets a third Supreme Court selection, and I want you to really think about this, we are moments away from little girls who get pregnant, can't tell their parents, but will need to have an abortion and will give themselves one. You can hate Joe Biden all you want, but I need you to know that voting rights and federal protections for people to vote, gone. A Donald Trump reinforced U.S. Supreme Court. Redistricting? don't even try it. The influence and the impact they will have on the body politic and elections for the next 30 years will be something that you regret, and we alive right now are going to be responsible for it. History is not going to be too kind to us because all of a sudden we're standing on some kind of righteousness. Joe Biden is a racist, Sherwin. And your parents probably were too. But I still like you. Good morning, Ronald Waters. Tammy Reed, I lived in Madison for a summer. Doesn't blow my mind at all. Listen, man, listen. I wish I had words for it. And I search to find the ways to communicate the kind of racism that exists in Madison. Like Madison has always been a beacon of liberalism, even going back to the days of the Vietnam War. And you can go back even further than that. Camp Randall, which was a Union Army encampment, which fought for the Civil War. Of course, Wisconsin sent a lot of heroes onto the battlefield of the Civil War. So there is a history of abolitionism. The Underground Railroad, which wasn't an actual railroad. Got to tell people that because they don't get a lot of history. It ran through, there's stops, Racine and Kenosha, and then on up to Canada. The newspaper in Waukesha, which used to be one of the most conservative voting counties in America. You know how tough that is to be one of the most Republican voting counties in the country? Because there's Texas. They got counties. Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia. Wisconsin has one of the most consistently Republican voting counties in America. In fact, we have a firewall of Republican counties, and what do? Form a noose around the diversity of Milwaukee. You got Ozaukee County, Washington County, and Waukesha County. They call those the WOW counties because they need 3 counties to outvote Milwaukee County. It's an interesting, fascinating bit of political trivia. But the newspaper in Waukesha, it's called the Freeman. You guys know that? Because in the 1860s, it was an abolitionist newspaper. And it's called the Freeman to this. The Waukesha newspaper, talk about irony. Almost the irony of how people degrade and demean black people but need those same black people to vote for their Democratic candidates. One of the most conservative voting counties in America has their newspaper named after essentially an abolitionist slogan. And most people don't even know that. There's a real fascinating history because there were 2 newspapers in Waukesha right around the 1850s, 1860s, and one of them wasn't liberal enough on being anti-slavery, and so the Freeman broke off from that paper and formed it. It's all on the Google. If you Google, for those of you that do your research. I may have paraphrased a bit, but whatever. One of the most Republican voting counties in the country borders on Milwaukee, and they're going to turn out for Donald Trump, even though their cases of coronavirus and COVID-19 are spiking, mostly because Donald Trump has not enforced anything when it comes to federal law and protecting people. They're still going to vote for him. Madison, I moved here from Madison, and even though Milwaukee ain't all that, it's more diverse. I'm more comfortable here. So that's what I was going to talk about. I got distracted by Waukesha. The white progressives from Madison, they live in a bubble, okay? Because Madison is all white people. And the black people that are there, I mean, there's a black community there. I think it's the west side of Madison where you got some black folks. But you know the arrest disparity in Madison? The liberal beacon of Wisconsin, right? The progressive home, the place where they recalled Scott Walker. The arrest of African Americans to white is 10-1. The disparity is worse in Madison. And learning something about some of the progressives in Madison, black people, and this is not, like if you talk to individual Madisonians, they'll probably tell you something different, but go to Middleton, go to Fitchburg. You'd think you were in the South. But even the more progressive Madisonians that live in their own bubble, which lacks diversity, sees black people more as numbers and votes than they do as real humans. Or they have this really odd confusion which comes from sheer ignorance of not knowing anything about the culture that they need to vote on their behalf. Well, Sherwin, how come the blacks just don't understand? Like how? And I worked for a liberal-owned business where the owner of that business was from Madison, and he was one of the most despicable human beings that I ever met. Not only was he one of the most despicable human beings I ever met, he had this fetish for Donald Trump. And this is a guy that coins himself as a liberal. Which means that the further left you go, now that's changing a bit now because now the far left in America are revolutionaries, right? Where prior to this movement in America, the far left were those I would liken to a particular type of democratic socialist. That was the far left. And Bernie Sanders and his ideas got a lot of younger people involved, and that's a very good thing. But the policy proposals that Bernie Sanders was setting forward weren't things an executive could do. Bernie Sanders was promising things that could not happen. He was trying to sell young people an idealistic world that he had not been able to achieve in 35 years of public service. But for some reason, when he becomes president, Bernie Sanders, he can make all of these things come true. He can make sure you get a fair wage. He can make sure your health insurance is magically free. He can forgive your student loans. Like that doesn't, you know that almost $1 trillion of the United States wealth, because we're a wealthy country, I think, we used to be, but almost $1 trillion of our wealth is your student loan debt. So we can forgive your student loans, but we are going to put the United States of America $1 trillion in the hole to where we're going to have to borrow that money from China. We can forgive your student loans. I just need you to know that $1 trillion of U.S. wealth is in your student loans and the interest that you pay on them. I know it's a terrible system, but they told us we had to get an education. And because they told us that, what do? Went and got an education. What do? Had to borrow money because the cost of tuition was going up. Now the United States uses our student loan debt as its wealth. The kinds of things that Bernie Sanders was promising, and this is why I had an issue with Bernie Sanders, because he knew what he was doing. He was promising things like almost like, I can fix it. Elect me, I can fix it. You know who else had similar sentiments? Donald Trump. Elect me and I'll do all these things. I'll build a wall. I'll ban the Muslims. So in order for Bernie Sanders' agenda to come true, he would have to act unilaterally, this unitary executive theory. And if you don't know what that is, I need you to please look that up. And Donald Trump is using the unitary executive theory, and also members of the U.S. Supreme Court that Donald Trump will appoint also believe in the unitary executive theory. Clarence Thomas believes in it. And so that's when I say those that are on the very far left, the progressive of the Democratic spectrum, prior to now, because now the far left of the spectrum are essentially revolutionaries. But there's this angst that exists. And the more progressive you get, the whiter the populations are. In fact, there's not enough progressives to win any national election. There are 83,000 elected officials in America. There are 9 Democratic Socialists. And of the 9 Democratic Socialists, 6 of them are on the Chicago City Council. Oh, by the way, if you're from Wisconsin and you go to Chicago, you have to quarantine for 14 days. And if you don't, they can fine you as much as $7,000. So we love you too, Chicago. And so that's why I saw these similarities between the progressive left and Donald Trump, because it's woe is me and our wages are too low, and then the climate, and then we've got all this student loan debt. You need to come in and fix it. Just like the constituencies that voted for Donald Trump, woe is me. These minorities are coming, and oh my God, I'm losing my job. They got to build a wall because Mexico is, oh, woe is me. And you know what those are? Whether it be far left Bernie Sanders supporters or Bernie Sanders himself, are far right Donald Trump supporters. You know, it is woe is me because I'm white in a changing America and I can't get everything that this country promised to me. There's very little difference. Just because they vote for a Democrat and they support Bernie Sanders doesn't mean they have the same woe is me feeling of white populations in this country. You know, white people have a lower life expectancy now. And for a while, people couldn't figure it out. They call it deaths of despair. And let me not discount that. But the conditions that African Americans have no choice but are forced to live through, not knowing what's going to happen the next day, not knowing what's going to happen with this next police encounter. Your life is full of either not knowing or having to get mercy or opportunity from white people. Like that defines a lot of our lives. But when white culture in America that grew up with Confederate statues and Christopher Columbus discovered America and a whole bunch of other fallacies, when they realize that they actually have to compete beyond what their white skin can give them, they drink themselves to death. Or they commit suicide in higher per capita rates. Or they overdose on dope. If that's not powerful, like how black people have to live. White people have just, in the last probably 30 years, have really just seen this decline. And they can't take it. Now, not individual white people. Some individual white people are just fine. But the number of white friends that I have that didn't make it to 40, staggering. This cat I went to school with, man, I was cool with this cat. Jake Vanook. His wife went to the grocery store, came home, was on the floor dead. I'm 45, Jake's probably 44, 43, was. My guy Andy Moncher stood up in our friend Nunzio Vallone's wedding. When I told you guys I stood up in an Italian wedding. Well, that was a Lutheran wedding. He married a Lutheran woman, but he's Italian. Andy overdosed. So, with that being said, having the discussion about privilege is one that takes careful thought, because when it's all said and done, whether you're white and progressive and liberal or white and conservative, you now are experiencing some of the angst and the pain that black people have just had to deal with. And what I will say is this before I get out of here. It doesn't have to be the end of the world. But in order for us to deal with that angst of oppression of either wearing a mask or getting murdered by the police, it requires us to work together. Even though we may have differences of opinions and different cultures and different religions, to stop the angst that we feel in this nation will require us to work together. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you listening to my rambling broadcast about progressives, a woman's G-spot, female ejaculation, and privilege. You guys have yourselves a wonderful day. See you tomorrow.